BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, welcome to this special weekend episode of Black Box Online Radio. My name is Ned DeHaan and I am your host. In this bonus episode, I will be talking to you guys all about the Mandela effect, and this is a follow-up to a previous episode that I made earlier in the year. Now, this is mostly a true crime channel, but this is a subject that I find to be rather fascinating. I first learned about the Mandela effect during my conversations with Justin Danneman, who is the author of the book Ghost of War, and in the first episode that I did on the Mandela effect, I played a portion of that interview. But in this one, I wanted to talk about some different Mandela effect examples, as well as looking at some of the questions and comments that you guys left on the previous episode. And firstly, I would like to provide a very small introduction about the Mandela effect, and I think the best way to encapsulate this idea is to say that the Mandela effect is a collective false memory. When many people en masse, we're talking not only 4 or 5 people, but maybe hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people all remember the same thing that allegedly did not happen according to the rest of the populations. And during my discussion with Justin Danneman, he shared that it gets this name because a lot of people believed that Nelson Mandela passed away in the 1980s, and in 2013 they announced that he passed away, and so many people were shocked because they remembered him dying decades previously. So that's the origin of the Mandela effect in contemporary terms. But I would like to look at some examples that are widely discussed, and one of them I think is really interesting because it shows that the Mandela effect is a little bit real, but it also goes to show that there are explanations about why some people are claiming that they have these types of memories, and they're not actually baseless. One of them relates to Pokemon. I was about to say the video game, but Pokemon is so much larger than a video game. It's a TV show, series of movies, the cards, all of that. It relates to Pokemon, and it talks about how the most famous Pokemon, Pikachu, used to have a tail with a black tip. Pikachu is, of course, the electricity-filled Pokemon of Ash, the main character of Pokemon. But some people remember that Pikachu had a black tip on the tail, and other people remember that the tail was completely yellow. When I first learned of this one, I just thought that, I was like, no, wait a second, what color is it? Completely yellow. But then, in my mind, I was able to see the black tip on the tail. And I was talking about this on a Facebook page, and somebody pointed out that they own a Pikachu figurine that was purchased in the late 90s, and it had a black tip on the tail. So I went over to Google Images and I started looking around a little bit, and one of the first images I saw was a Pikachu figurine with a black tip on the tail. And I also saw other Pokemon merchandise that had a black tip on Pikachu's tail. So it seems that that one isn't completely a collective false memory, and that these things happen because they are shared in different ways. Like during the last episode, I was talking about the Fruit of the Loom cornucopia, and somebody even wrote into Black Box Online Radio saying that Fruit of the Loom is a popular clothing brand, mostly associated with underwear, and a lot of people believe that there was a cornucopia that was used on their logo behind the quote-unquote Fruit of the Loom. And somebody wrote this out so perfectly that other than the Fruit of the Loom cornucopia, they didn't think that any of the Mandela effect examples were very strong. And quite shockingly, I saw almost the exact same comment posted on Facebook when somebody was talking about the Mandela effect, saying that they thought that the Fruit of the Loom cornucopia was the only strong example. And I pointed out how, after doing a little bit of digging, it appears that the cornucopia was used on the tags and counterfeit knockoff versions of Fruit of the Loom. And it even could have been used on certain authentic ones for the tags. People have posted photos of the tags on their Fruit of the Loom clothing, and not only underwear, but also t-shirts, and it shows a cornucopia, but it wasn't used on the packaging. And it's true, like, if you do get on a website and you look up the Fruit of the Loom cornucopia, like a fact-checking website, they'll tell you it never existed. But people have evidence to the contrary, the same way that people would have evidence to the contrary about Pikachu having a black tail. Well, it was not used in the TV show or on the cards or even in the video game, but it was used on the merchandise. So I think that Pikachu's tail and the Fruit of the Loom cornucopia really represent two different aspects of the Mandela effect. One of them is that there actually are these types of collective false memories that people have because certain images fit the pattern. And in other instances, there actually are case examples when it isn't completely a false memory. There actually are very hard to find pieces of evidence that show that these things are real. Some people are genuinely remembering things in a real way. And this brings up the next point, talking about Mr. Monopoly. Some people insist that the Monopoly man, known as Mr. Monopoly or Mr. Pennybags, used to wear a monocle, but when you look at the Monopoly man on Google Images, he isn't wearing a monocle. And if you go through the fact-checking websites, once again, you will see that they'll say that Mr. Monopoly never wore a monocle. And I was actually just reading up on this, and I learned a piece of trivia, and that Mr. Monopoly's first name is actually Milburn, according to the book The Monopoly Companion. And I was just calling him Mr. Monopoly, but I always grew up calling him Mr. Pennybags, and that is his formal name. According to the Monopoly Companion, his name is Milburn Pennybags, also known as Rich Uncle Pennybags, also known as Mr. Pennybags and Mr. Monopoly. And I was over on Quora, and somebody wrote out an absolutely brilliant explanation for this one, saying that the reason why some people believe that the Monopoly man used to have a monocle was because they associate the monocle with high-class, elites, financially successful individuals from the past in older times, like say, for example, when the Monopoly game would have been created, and also because he's wearing the top hat, it fits the clothing at the time. People are making these types of mental associations, as well as they are just it's something that they think fits the pattern. And there are examples of this that could have altered the way that people think in other forms of media. Say, for example, somebody wrote out how in one of the Ace Ventura movies, Jim Carrey walks past a man who's wearing a monocle and says that he looks like the Monopoly man, or he says, "Are you Mr. Monopoly?" Something to that effect. And to be honest, I don't even remember that scene. I saw the Ace Ventura movies decades ago. What's it been, like 21 years since I saw one for the last time, so I don't remember that exact scene. But what they're pointing out is that they had this depiction of someone who was supposed to look like Mr. Monopoly wearing a monocle. So then certain things can affect the way that people think. Now, this is going to get into the next part of the Mandela effect, and these are some that I think are rather bizarre, but I think they might meet the category of the Mandela effect, and maybe they do, maybe they don't. You be the judge. And Oscar Mayer is a very famous hot dog brand, and people might even think about the Oscar Mayer Mobile, the Wiener Mobile, if you will. And the name Oscar Mayer is spelled Oscar for Oscar, and Mayer is spelled Mayer, yet countless people insist that they remember seeing it written as Meyer. And I would be one of them. Yes, indeed, I would be one of them, because I did not know that the name Mayer could be spelled Mayer, and there's a singer out there named John Mayer who spells his name Mayer, and he pronounces it Mayer. And I remember very clearly, it wasn't until I was watching the show Desperate Housewives that had a character played by Terry Hatcher named Susan Meyer, and her name was spelled Mayer. And even on Desperate Housewives, they occasionally would have people mispronouncing her name, like people who didn't know the character personally. It's all part of the script, and they would refer to her as Mrs. Mayer because her name was spelled Mayer. But I grew up singing the Oscar Mayer song. I grew up looking at Oscar Mayer in the grocery store, and I don't ever remember seeing it written as Mayer. Now, this could be a very clear example of the Mandela effect, or it could be that I wasn't really paying attention. I confess completely. I was not really paying attention to the spelling of this hot dog brand that my family almost never, ever purchased, because, we would get other types of hot dogs, and just by for some reason, we didn't purchase Oscar Mayer hot dogs, so I wasn't really looking too closely. And this ties into several other Mandela effect examples. Fruit Loops, for one. Fruit Loops is spelled Frootloops, and so many people think that it was always spelled Fruit Loops, Fruit, the conventional way that you would spell the word fruit, and purely goes back to the same concept. I wasn't paying attention. I didn't really care too much how this brand of cereal spelled their name, and I mean, I think that we would be easily distracted by the fact that they use Fruit Loops, like the actual cereal, as part of the logo. So that's kind of just what more of what you're thinking about. And in all seriousness, I wasn't looking that closely, but my family did purchase Fruit Loops all the time. We didn't really eat Oscar Mayer hot dogs, but we definitely had Fruit Loops. Again, I just wasn't really paying attention, and even the name Looney Tunes, I think that that's a little bit more of an interesting one. Looney Tunes, the cartoon series featuring Bugs Bunny and Porky Pig, is actually spelled Looney for loony, and everybody thinks that the word tunes was spelled Toons because, like, cartoons. And some people even refer to cartoons as tunes, Toons, but it's actually spelled Tunes. And I mean, this one I'm a little bit more surprised about, and everyone's saying, well, now, tunes with the double O would make a little bit more sense. I mean, not quite, because they often introduce it as merry melodies, silly symphonies. They use a lot of musical things that are incorporated into Looney Tunes. But again, I wasn't really paying that much attention. If you want to call that a Mandela effect, I think that that's a clear example. But there's another reason why I wanted to do this episode, and that's because I think a lot of the Mandela effect examples that I've noticed in these discussions wouldn't actually meet the criteria for being a Mandela effect, for being some type of collective false memory. And it's not just because there is the odd exception that just came to light, such as the Pikachu merchandise, or perhaps the Fruit of the Loom cornucopia on somebody's shirt tag. I think that it's more about how people are just referring to misquotes as a Mandela effect. And I was like, just misquoting a movie doesn't necessarily mean it's collective false memory. And this goes really into a lot of depth because, say, for example, with the film The Silence of the Lambs, one of the most famous lines is not even said in the movie, and it's when Anthony Hopkins' character Hannibal Lecter says, "Hello, Clarice," and that line is immediately associated with the film, but it was never said. He actually just says good morning. And that's not really a Mandela effect in my mind. That sounds more just like a misquote. Again, people think that it's appropriate for the character, but he didn't actually say that. And also when you have people like Sally Field, who was not even in a movie when she said this one, but she did an Oscar speech, and she said, "You like me, you really like me," or did she? It turns out she actually said something different, but people remember it in a different way. Again, it gets misquoted once, and then it gets shared again and again. And Very Well Mind has some good things about the Mandela effect. And this one, for example, says, when Sally Field won an Oscar in 1985, her acceptance speech included the oft-repeated, oft-parodied line, "You like me, really like me," except what she actually said was, "I can't deny the fact that you like me right now. You like me." It's a misquote. I mean, she said something similar. It's just people remember one version, one person misquoted it, and then another person misquoted it. Then it gets shared in the media. And "you like me, you really like me" is a little bit sillier. Maybe it's funnier to say it that way, so that's why people would keep going with it. And there is another one that comes to the top of almost all the Mandela effect examples, and that is Sex in the City. Is it Sex in the City or Sex and the City? And I also don't like this one, and I don't even think this is exactly a Mandela effect because they sound practically the same. I mean, you could say that about the Looney Tunes one, but they sound practically the same. And again, that is just like a connecting word. It's like when people say that they don't remember there being a hyphen on the Kit Kat packages. Was there a hyphen or was there not? I mean, that's just some type of thing that connects the stuff together that people wouldn't necessarily be paying too close attention to. But I would like to go back to that website, verywellmind.com. It's a website that I've never used before, but they had something very interesting that was written out about the Mandela effect, which I would like to read for you right now. So, Why does this effect happen? This is, everything is in quotes now. Let's explore. False memories. A more likely explanation for the Mandela effect involves false memories. Before we consider what is meant by false memories, let's look at the example of the Mandela effect, as it will help understand how memory can be faulty and may lead to the phenomenon that we are describing. Who was Alexander Hamilton? Most Americans learned in school that he was a founding father of the United States of America, but that he was not a president. However, when asked about the presidents of the United States, many people mistakenly believe that Hamilton was a president. Why? If we consider a simple neuroscience explanation, the memory for Alexander Hamilton is encoded in an area of the brain where the memories for the presidents of the United States are stored. The means by which memories are traced is called the engram, and the framework in which similar memories are associated with each other, and that is called the schema. Well, now, before we go any further into that, people might be thinking about Alexander Hamilton as a president because he was on a form of currency on the $10 bill, and some people, might even think that Benjamin Franklin was a president, although he's a little bit more widely discussed in a lot of different discussions. So I don't know too many people who've done that. They make jokes about how Benjamin Franklin was not a president, but Alexander Hamilton is definitely less of a famous historical figure, but I don't even think that's a good example now because thanks to the musical and the show Hamilton, Lin-Manuel Miranda and all that, people are mostly going to remember that Hamilton was not a president. But I do appreciate what they're saying about how certain memories get stored in a way that people make these types of associations. But I do like the example of how people are kind of putting their memories into certain patterns, or they start thinking in line with certain patterns, like the monocles associated with rich people with old-fashioned dress codes, that is, Mr. Monopoly and the top hat, or about how the name Meyer is more normally spelled M-E-Y-E-R. I really insist on that one with Oscar Mayer. I thought that the name Meyer was only spelled M-E-Y-E-R or M-Y-E-R. Those two names and spellings were how you wrote the name, so I just wasn't paying attention. But there is a song that you sing, my baloney has a first name, it's O-S-C-A-R. My baloney has a second name, I guess it's M-A-Y-E-R, but shows what I know. And back to Quora, there is a rather interesting post that was written from Richard from Beloit when he has written something out here that says, is the Mandela effect real, or is it just our memory playing tricks? For example, remembering that the Monopoly guy has a monocle, but our brains are referencing the Ace Ventura scene when he calls a man with a monocle Mr. Monopoly. Despite what people think, there is no real effect known as the Mandela effect. That's because it is not one thing, but sometimes our memory plays tricks on us, and we dream even while we are awake, and we simply simplify things into a more meaningful turn of phrase. It is a very loose collection of different things, not sufficiently defined as to be testable further. It is already very easily explained by the way our complicated and large brains work and fail to work. All the misquoted lines from well-known movies and television programs simply do not constitute meaningful proof. For instance, in Star Trek, not once did Captain Kirk say, "Beam me up, Scotty." In one of the movies, he did say, "Scotty, beam me up." We can all cite apparent examples, but so what if we can consider that there is no consequence or even consensus as to the effect and how it was caused, or even if it really exists. Apparently it doesn't really exist, even though there are those who are 100% certain that it does. The presumed cause or causes of something which is not real has not been pinned down. The very trivial perceived changes that are believed by some, not scientists, to have been caused by time travel, multiple universes, different dimensions, and parallel universes, blamed it on things that they have no evidence for. There are no juried or refereed journals on the Mandela effect. There are no scientists studying it. There are only countless, sometimes mildly amusing, sometimes creepy, but mostly unexciting stories. I think it's a very articulate post, but let's be clear about some things. As I said, I think we've been through several explanations already about how this could be working, and can I just say that I find it fascinating, I find it entertaining. I think that it's something that we should be curious about how we all had these types of misconceptions about how we all had these types of collective false memories, even if it's something as simple as a spelling error or a misquote, and even if it's not an extreme psychological mystery about how Anthony Hopkins didn't actually say "Hello, Clarice" in The Silence of the Lambs. I I mean, I think that it's good to know the truth no matter what it is, and it can be entertaining. And as Richard from Beloit even says here in this post, it is amusing. Yes, we do have amusing stories, and in these episodes that I've done about the Mandela effect here on Black Box Online Radio, I personally have not been trying to share any theory involving time travel and multiple universes and the timelines being altered. I just simply think it's interesting to study how other people are thinking, to be curious how other people are thinking, and also, let's not kid ourselves. We want to know more about ourselves. We want to know why that we had these types of false memories, why we weren't paying attention to the Fruit Loops box or the Oscar Mayer packages, even though we saw them a million times. And I don't think that there's too much about that. But finally, I would also like to provide another example of how there could be an explanation for something, and giving a shout out to the Black Pill Behemoth, who talked about an example of the Mandela effect in the previous episode, and it related to Sinbad the comedian. And there is this, again, collective false memory that Sinbad once played a genie in a movie that aired in the 1990s. And I had this very complicated explanation in the first episode when I said that there was an animated Sinbad the Sailor movie, again, not Sinbad the comedian, but Sinbad the Sailor, that came out in 2001. And there was another film with a genie from well before, I think it was from the 80s, based on the poster that I saw. And they had somewhat similar covers, so I thought that people were conflating them. And I even looked for that movie cover that I saw. They had the movie at my public library, like, when people would rent VHS tapes, I guess they would check them out from the public library. And there was this genie movie that had a similar cover, so that's what I thought was the source of it. But what the Black Pill Behemoth pointed out was that Sinbad once dressed up in a genie-like costume and hosted a marathon of Sinbad the Sailor movies on TBS, and that could have been the source of the misconception. But with the Sinbad genie movie, a lot of people insist that he was in a genie movie called Shazam, but they're actually thinking of the movie Kazam with Shaquille O'Neal. And I mean, I just found it fascinating that people are remembering that that movie was called Shazam at all. I mean, I remember it very clearly as Kazam, but that's even, again, another type of a misquote, misspelling, people remembering things in a different way. And if you want to call that one a Mandela effect, sure, but I think that a lot of the misspellings and just not remembering a hyphen or one connecting word wouldn't quite meet the criteria. The brain does not always perceive connecting words. Some people don't even recognize the word of or the, like articles and prepositions, when they're written out in sentences. So what do you think? Thank you so much for listening to this bonus episode of Black Box Online Radio. Anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there is always BlackBoxNid88 over on Instagram. If you like this episode, you can hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And that will be all for me now. I will see you on Zodiac Monday. Until next time.